Welcome into Boardroom Exclusives on StockTwits. Today, our guest is Dr. Mark Hedrick, CEO of Plus Therapeutics. Welcome aboard, Mark.
Hi, Michelle. Good to see you.
Let's start here with your drug, Reyobiq. The FDA recently granted orphan drug designation to Reyobiq for pediatric malignant gliomas. So the scope here is actually broader than what you originally asked for. Let's kick off things there. How does this bonus scope, so to speak, what does that tell you about how the FDA views Reyobiq's safety and potential?
Well, I can tell you from direct conversations with them outside of the orphan discussion is that they're very comfortable with the safety profile based on data that we've shared so far. And the orphan designation, looping in pediatric brain cancer, is actually the third that we've achieved with respect to Reyobiq, including adult gliomas or glioblastoma, leptomeningeal cancer, which is probably I would classify as our lead indication, and now pediatric cancer. And the timing's perfect because we're just beginning to start that trial at Lurie Children's Hospital this quarter.
Lurie Children's in Chicago.
In Chicago, correct.
Oh, okay. This orphan drug designation comes with, of course, 7 years of market exclusivity, tax credits. Does that sort of change the commercial math for the Respect PBC trial that you're launching this year?
It does, and it also provides an additional patent life and other benefits. So I think we feel like that the pediatric trial could go very quickly. It's built on top of a solid and extensive amount of data in adult patients showing safety. And so I think we're really looking to see that same safety signal in pediatric patients that we've seen in the adult patients. And then we can pivot to try to understand the efficacy signal that we hope it translates as well from adult to pediatric patients.
Let's talk a little bit about the Highmark win. On April 2nd, I know that you added Highmark, pushing your coverage to 75 million lives, basically doubling your coverage in a very short window here. Do you think the 150 million lives goal for 2026 is now maybe a conservative target?
Well, I wouldn't say it's conservative, but I think we're hitting all of our marks, no pun intended, as it relates to market access. So we have a number of additional potential payer contracts that are under negotiation right now, including most recently, we announced a proprietary laboratory analysis code, which is really critical part of the overall market access puzzle, which will help tee us up for Medicare coverage, hopefully later in the year or in 2027. So I think that 150 million is a good number. That certainly gets us a lot of reimbursement at the levels that we have targeted throughout the U.S. We're now essentially approved through the CLIA approval process by CMS in 49 to 50 states. Only New York is lacking, and we're working pretty hard to put that in place. So the market access pieces are really coming together for us.
I'm glad that you mentioned you're now licensed in 49 of 50 states. That's 95% of the U.S. population. Mm-hmm. With that plumbing sort of done, what are the key hurdles to hitting that 1,250 annualized test order milestone?
Well, right now it's really managing demand. We have more demand than we have operational capacity. So I'm talking to you here today from our new facility in Houston, where we're ramping up operationally so we can meet that demand. And that 1,250 you mentioned really is just a matter of converting prior commercial demand for the product over to this current laboratory. But in the background, we need to continue to hit our market access milestones, which we mentioned, and then grow the sales force. The opportunity commercially is beyond just the neuro-oncology market. It really gets into the overall medical oncology community, and then ultimately into the hospital, into the emergency room, and in a clinic where patients can use the CNSide testing platform. But first, it's really building out that operational capacity to meet the demand that we see currently in the market.
I wanted to loop back to what you mentioned earlier in the interview about the new coding, the new AMA PLA code for the CNSide TCE test. Most of us are not in the weeds on medical billing. But can you expand a little bit further on why having this unique proprietary code? I know you mentioned it has to do with some Medicare payments. Why is that so critical for the revenue ramp starting in July?
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily important for July, but in terms of the overall process of getting the product commercialized and collecting it is a unique code for our tests. No one else can use it. Any people, any groups that want to follow into this business are going to have to go through the same long process that we've gone through to obtain that. So it's very specific. It's unique to the tests that we deliver. And it's an important piece of the puzzle. It doesn't get you billing, but it gets you coding, and that really tees up uh, makes the process easier on the payer side, and then also makes it easier for governmental payers like Medicare. So it really is it's a statement about the quality of the test, the uniqueness of the test, and its capability, but also sends a message to payers and doctors that the test is important, it's value added, and that it's an important part of the overall care puzzle for these patients.
Let's dig into some of your clinical catalysts now, not just Reyobiq, but sort of the FDA roadmap writ large. You recently incorporated feedback here from a Type B meeting with the FDA regarding leptomeningeal metastases. How did that meeting specifically accelerate your path to a formal application for approval?
Well, the thing to understand regarding that FDA meeting is that there is nothing approved for the treatment of leptomeningeal cancer. So doctors, when a patient's diagnosed with this, will try to take things that are off the shelf and use them off-label to try to improve survival. But there's an epidemic of this cancer, and that's why it's so important that we move quickly. And as part of that being quick and agile, we went to the FDA very early after our phase 1 trial, showing safety and an efficacy signal to try to align on what a pivotal trial, an ultimate approval trial would look like with the FDA after phase 1. Arguably, that's a bit early, but since there's nothing approved, there is no roadmap for us to follow. So we wanted to clarify some key things, like what would the endpoints in the trial be? We made a lot of progress with them. We aligned on the universe of endpoints that we might look at. So overall survival, of course, that's common, but we also got agreement with the FDA that we would look at patient-reported outcomes and improvement in neurologic symptoms. So it gives us more flexibility in terms of how we design and execute a pivotal trial. There were other things like that came out of that in terms of the other elements of the trial design that are critical, but it really gives us confidence going into our phase 2 trial, so we can collect that data so that then we can power and execute a pivotal trial with a lot of confidence that if the drug is safe and it works, that we're going to be able to show that and ultimately get approval.
You know, pivoting to the ISPOR study, in May, you're presenting data showing that CNSide can reduce healthcare costs for LM by 40%. You know, so many consumers are tightening their belts these days. Do you think that this sort of health economics data can be your biggest weapon for winning over Medicare?
I think it's a huge potential benefit to the CNSide or diagnostic component of the business. So you're absolutely right. So, showing that the diagnostic makes a rapid diagnosis for patients who are very fragile and can uh, their condition can degrade very quickly is important, and being able to monitor their treatment is important, and being able to choose what treatment approach the doctor uses. Those are all fantastic and speak to the issue of improving patient care. But the point that you raised about improving the cost of care was a bit of a surprise. Not so much that there was some effect, but the magnitude of effect. So a 40% reduction in the cost of care for these patients who are very sick and very fragile was an unexpected benefit. And we think that's really going to help us as we check off our market access milestones over the next year or two, and wrestle not only Medicare, but some of these other payer groups to the ground, so we can get comprehensive coverage throughout the United States.
Dr. Hedrick, you just highlighted 3 Reyobiq presentations that your company made at the Society for Neuro-Oncology recently. Can you summarize sort of what that data showed and what gives you confidence heading into the phase 2 readouts?
Well, sure. It's hard to integrate kind of 3 very different presentations, but I think I'd put it like this. So, number one, the safety signal with Reyobiq is remarkable. In recurrent glioblastoma and leptomeningeal cancer, 2 very important and morbid cancers, we showed a remarkable safety profile. We're delivering amounts of radiation that no one has ever delivered to the brain and the central nervous system, and we've done it in a remarkable with a remarkable safety signal. And I think it's a function of the drug formulation and how we deliver it. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is we're showing very interesting and important signs of efficacy in phase 1. In phase 1, generally, the role is for safety, but we're showing in both trials, both in our glioblastoma trial and our LM trial, very strong signals of efficacy in the trial, despite that very large amount of radiation we're delivering. So those are both really promising and give us a lot of confidence going into later stage trials.
I appreciate the added context there, and gives certainly patients and investors something to look forward to. Speaking of something to look forward to, let's dig into the 2026 investor roadmap. We have Respect LM data in Q3 and Respect GBM data in Q4. If those results align with what you've seen so far, what's the next step for Plus? Are we looking at perhaps a pivotal trial design by year end?
Yeah, I think so. You could we break the businesses down again for just to make it easier for people to follow. So for Reyobiq, our lead drug, as you mentioned, we're conducting effectively 2 phase 2 trials, and one is in recurrent glioblastoma, one is leptomeningeal cancer. If we can complete those trials around the end of the year, early next year, for GBM, completing the phase 2 and validating the efficacy signal we saw in phase 1, and for leptomeningeal cancer, validating the appropriate dosing regime with a cohort expansion functioning as a phase 2, that will set us up nicely for a pivotal trial. In parallel, we need to enhance our capability to manufacture the drug for pivotal trial and then on to commercial. So that's going on in real time in the background to support those pivotal programs for next year. For CNSide, it's really 3 things, and we've mentioned all of those here or there on the call. But number 1 is building out our operational capacity to meet the demand that we see, but we can't service right now for CNSide. Number 2 is to continue to hit our marks as it relates to market access. And the third thing is expand our sales force. So there's a smaller neuro-oncology community that sees these patients every day, but there's a much bigger medical oncology market that actually that sees the majority of these patients. So building out that sales force is another important milestone for the remainder of the year.
And finally here, between the 40% cost reduction that we discussed, the new billing codes, the FDA orphan drug designation, the momentum here is undeniable. What should the investor community, though, be looking for specifically as the next immediate signal of success?
Yeah, I think it can be found in our 2026 milestones. It's number of cases. How many cases of CNSide are we accomplishing? And what's that growth trajectory look like? Billing will typically lag in a diagnostic as we bill payers and Medicare ultimately, but looking at that number of cases. Number 2, how many accounts are we adding? And we're doing very well there. We're onboarding a number of accounts. As I mentioned, that demand is something that we're trying to manage. It's there. We're trying to manage it appropriately so we could operationally meet that. And then lives covered. You mentioned the number of lives covered, about 75 million. Our goal is to get to 150 million by the end of the year. We're on track for that. But those are sort of early evidence that it's all coming together commercially and gives us high confidence that there's a very attractive market opportunity ahead of us.
Dr. Hedrick, thank you so much for sharing your vision and the roadmap for 2026 for Plus Therapeutics. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Michelle.